How many of you have had to give an English presentation in a class of yours? How many of you have done that? A few of you? How does it feel? Scary? Okay. Like that. Fear, right? Fear, anxiety. Okay. I kind of know what it's like, actually. Although English is my first language, I've done other languages. When I was in college, I studied German, and I went to Germany to study for a year, and I had to give a presentation in class in German, in a linguistics class, and I stayed up the night before to prepare for it, and guess how I did? Not good, because I was too tired, and for other reasons which I'll talk about in a few minutes. It didn't go so well because, for one thing, I was focusing on two things at once, the content and the language, and as I will explain, that doesn't really work. So today I'm going to talk to you about the following things. We'll talk about planning and organization, getting started, how you get started preparing for your presentation, especially in English. Next, we'll talk about the visual presentation, how to design your slides properly, how to use PowerPoint properly, or maybe not at all, and alternatives to PowerPoint that are out there. And then next, I'll talk about rehearsal, aspects of rehearsal, including the language aspect, rehearsing for a presentation in English when it's not your primary language, as well as the what I call the multitasking issue, the multitasking problem when you're having to give a presentation in a second language. And then we'll talk about aspects of the actual delivery, vocal delivery, voice quality, posture, and such. So let's start with planning. And when you're planning, planning, we'll talk about how to get started, basic structure, and introductions a little bit. And to start with, well, you just jump into it like this, eh? Particularly in terms of the English, a mistake that you might make is try to do things in Korean first and then translate it. Good idea? Yes? No? No. Why? Why is it hard to translate? To do it first in Korean and then just translate it? It's a great deal of effort, especially when English and Korean are so completely different. The languages are so different structurally and in vocabulary and such. It's like Korean is from Venus and English is from Mars. It's a bad idea. You'll waste a lot of time. So I want to encourage you as much as possible to start in English. No, not that English, but English language. As much as possible, think in English. Start your planning stage doing as much as possible in English and not translating. Do as little translation as possible. You'll actually save time. So, for example, when I did my German presentation, of course, I did everything starting in German, thinking in German, and writing everything out in German. At least that was one thing I did right, and I'm glad I did. Although between English and German it's not too hard to translate, but really between Korean and English, you need a master's degree in interpretation before you can do that, because the languages are so different. So, first of all, start doing everything in English when you get started. And probably some things you want to do, brainstorming. For some people, some kind of graphical organizer, like a diagram, a flow chart, and then finally moving towards an outline before you start really doing your slides or anything. So brainstorm means coming up with a lot of different ideas, and it doesn't have to be organized at this stage. It doesn't have to look nice and pretty. Just try to spit out as many ideas as you can. Some people prefer to do this by themselves, just writing random thoughts on paper, whatever comes to mind on paper. Some people like to maybe chat with a friend or a group of friends to come up with ideas, especially if you're more of an extroverted kind of thinker. Whatever works for you. Do your brainstorming stage first. And then once you've done your brainstorming, for some people, they like to kind of organize it graphically. Now, some people can brainstorm and then go right to the outline stage, and that's more like me. But some people like to organize things graphically, so you have all of your messy notes, and you just draw lines and circles to connect things. Maybe you want to make what we call a mind map or a concept map, or maybe you want to organize things into a diagram or a flow chart. Whatever works for you, especially if you are a more visual kind of person. But then it's good to put things into an outline to help you organize your thoughts. Something like a standard outline like that, and you'll see there are about 3 to 5 kind of main sections, 3 to 5 main points in a good talk. And then each of those main sections or main points in turn consists of maybe 3 to 5 subpoints. And those subpoints in turn may have various examples, illustrations, evidence, and such. This is kind of the ideal whether you're writing an English essay or a research paper or you're doing a presentation. Why is this a good idea? Well, it's for memory purposes. For your memory and for the memory of your audience, your listeners. When you're listening to a presentation, you can remember it better and come away with more if the presentation has been organized into about 3 to 5 main points. And that's because human working memory can hold at one time about 3 to 5 items in working memory at a time. And so you can kind of keep in mind 3 to 5 main points and 3 to 5 main subpoints under each main point. And if you organize things that way, then it's going to be easier for people to remember. It's also going to be easier for you to remember the flow of your talk. Because when you're giving a presentation, especially if you are not experienced at public speaking and you're fighting with the English, it's easy to get lost in the middle of your presentation. You forget where you are. But if you have things organized and you've got a nice outline to follow, then it's easier for you to recover and find where you are and to resume. And it's going to make it easier for people in your audience to understand. Another nice thing about an outline is you can prioritize. You can determine which things are more important, which have greater priority, and which things have less priority. Because if you are not so experienced in a presentation, what's a common problem? You find yourself running out of time. And you have 20 minutes and you're at 15 minutes and you found you've only covered half of your points. What do you do? Well, before your presentation, when you organize it, also if you're teaching a class, some of you are teachers or future teachers, same principle. You identify items that are less important, items that are more important. So there are more important items that you definitely have to cover in full detail. There are items that are less important, and if you find you are running out of time, you can skip them. You can maybe go through them more quickly, or you can leave them out completely. And if you're using PowerPoint, you can probably estimate about 1 slide per minute for a presentation as a general rule. Transitions. When you're planning your presentation, it helps to plan out at least some of your major transitions from one section to another. And on the website, or some of you have printed out the handouts, there is a handout with what various people call either transitions, some people call them discourse markers, people who study linguistics call them discourse markers, people in education sometimes call them signposting because they're kind of signs or labels that tell people where you're going in your talk. So if you say, okay, now we've talked about X, now let's move on to Y, that's kind of telling people I'm wrapping up one section and I'm moving on, transitioning into a new section. Or similarly, if you say, okay, this is X, let's talk about what X means in terms of Y, or how does X apply to Y. Those are transitions. And a particularly important transitional element is your introduction. So you want to plan an effective introduction. It might be some kind of a leading question, an effective question to get people's attention, to get them to think. It might be simply an overview of what I'm going to talk about. these are the things I'm going to talk about, X, Y, and Z. It might also include maybe establishing the relevance or the rationale. I'm going to explain to you X, and X is important because, or you need to know about X because. I kind of explain why the topic of the presentation is important. So any combination of these things are good for an introduction, especially the kind of overview where you tell your people, your audience, what you're going to talk about. Okay, next, visual presentation, such as slide design, PowerPoint. Okay, you want to avoid this situation. This is PowerPoint poisoning. Okay, PowerPoint poisoning. What can cause PowerPoint poisoning? Reading from the slides. How many of you have been in that situation? The speaker simply reads from either his or her notes. That's very boring. I've endured lectures where grad students read aloud an entire lecture from notes, or likewise from slides. I have been in classes where we experienced this for an entire hour in a darkened room and came out feeling like I was in a coma. Not just asleep, but in a coma. So you don't want to inflict this kind of pain on your audience. They are supposed to be your classmates, not your victims. So you want to avoid reading aloud your slides, and that's a big problem. And unfortunately, PowerPoint tends to make it easy to do so. Or this. Lots of text crammed in there. Ideally, you shouldn't, a general rule is you shouldn't have more than 6 lines of text. That's a general rule, 6 major points or 6 lines of text. This is like fine print on a document. And notice coloring, colored font, bad idea. It's going to be hard to see, especially in a big room. Highlighting, things like that. Don't try to be artsy. This is an academic presentation, not an art work for the Modern Art Museum. How about this? Does that look like a good graph? No, why? It's small and it's crowded. PowerPoint is not designed for conveying a lot of information. It is a limited medium. It is designed for conveying a small amount of information at one time. So a lot of text is not good. Crowded pictures like this, not good. In this case, you would either want to put this on a handout or at least break this up into several separate slides if possible. So if you have a lot of information for your listeners, put it on a handout perhaps or some other medium, because PowerPoint cannot convey a lot of information. Likewise, don't do that. And if you try to do like that, you really should be sent off to Siberia. Don't do that. How about this? Isn't that cute? There's a piggy, a kitty, a bunny rabbit, and 2 duckies. Cute, right? Does it belong in an academic presentation? No, not really. It's not relevant. But sometimes people like to do all kinds of fancy decorations, transitions, or sometimes cute slide backgrounds, really cutesy looking themes. But you want to be professional, and you need it to be clear and readable so that everyone can read it and so that it looks professional. So you might like some of these PowerPoint themes or backgrounds that are really cutesy, girlish, Japanese anime characters or whatever. Flowers, don't do that. It should be professional looking. You wouldn't put flowers in a slide for a business meeting, right? So avoid being cutesy. Try to avoid special effects like these transition effects between slides. It's actually distracting. It distracts from your content. You're trying to do an academic presentation, not a Hollywood movie. So, avoid reading from a script or from your PowerPoint, either way. This means you want to speak freely, and so a common mistake that students will make in a second language especially is trying to write out a whole script, okay, like a whole script that you're going to read from. That makes it easy to get lost, for one thing. Secondly, it's going to be really boring for your audience, whether it's a paper script, words written out on paper and you're just reading aloud, or you're reading from your slides. You need to speak freely in your own words. And later I'll talk about rehearsal and the language rehearsal and such, but you do not want to just read from a script. You want to speak freely in your own words, focusing on the content of your talk, not the language. So you may not feel very comfortable speaking in English, but you don't want to read from a script because that will be boring and that will actually prevent you from interacting with the audience, and it prevents you from focusing on the content of your talk. So if you use PowerPoint or other software, use slides for kind of simple things, presenting your main ideas, your main talking points, your outlines. Maybe for presenting definitions, even Korean definitions of English terms. Use it for things like that. It's good for simple graphics also. Simple graphics, media, multimedia files, relatively simple tables and charts, not complex stuff. Try to use large font, large text so that people in the back of the room can see it. Not too much text. Again, simple foreground and background themes or color patterns, like black or very dark text on a white background or a light background, minimal design, or white text on a dark blue background, or if you like blood red, dark blood red, that's fine. I've seen medical people, I guess medical people like blood red backgrounds for some reason. That's fine. Avoid colors, pink, purple, yellow, things that are going to be hard to see. Keep your slides simple looking if you use slides. There's something else what in psychology we call modality, or the channel, the information channel, where what your slide shows and what you say should be complementary. So when you talk about modality, that's like a sensory modality or channel or mode. So you're listening to me talk and you're watching my graphic slides. So these are two different channels, the visual and the audio. So they should not be exactly the same. If a person reads aloud from the slide, you're getting the same information on two channels, visual, audio, and that's boring. So what you have on your slides should complement what you say, but you should not read aloud from your slides. They should not be exactly identical, but the picture should be relevant. This kind of picture might be relevant if you're talking about ichthyology. It might or it might not, but you want your pictures to be relevant. Don't put in pictures just for the sake of pictures, but pictures can be effective to help people remember certain points if the picture is good and it goes with the content. Otherwise, don't throw in unnecessary pictures, like bunnies and piggies and such. How about this? Which version is better, the one on the left or the one on the right? Okay, this is kind of hard to see, and again, if your graphic is actually hard to see, that's not a good graphic if it's hard to see. But you see here there are a bunch of labels that are actually underneath the graphic. So this graphic actually needs to be cleaned up. It should be made clearer. You do need bigger text here, so this is a problem. The text is too small. This would be fine for a handout, but not for a PowerPoint or slide graphic. Text is unreadable. And also, in this side, the text is all the labels are down here below. And that's not really such a good idea. In this one, the labels are actually inside, next to what they go with. So here, this is kind of what we call split attention. You have to split your attention. You have to go back between the label and the picture. And that is not very good. It takes more time, and it's more confusing. It's more coherent when your labels are, inside or next to what they refer to. So if you use labels, be careful. Okay, now let's talk about presentation software. PowerPoint, if you use PowerPoint, use it conservatively. You don't have to use PowerPoint for the whole time, for the whole talk. You can use it for part of the time. It should not dominate your talk. If you don't have Microsoft Office, there are other alternatives. There are certain what we call open source or free programs. They can save either in Microsoft format or their own open document format, and I personally use these. One problem is if I create a PowerPoint presentation in Microsoft PowerPoint and I go to another computer, I find that Microsoft can't read its own files on a different computer with a different version of PowerPoint or Microsoft Office. It's like Microsoft is not compatible sometimes with its own software. So I have these compatibility problems where my file will not open up properly. So sometimes what I do is, if I do use a slide, I might use these free programs and save it in maybe two different formats, like the PowerPoint format and the open document format. And if I'm using this, I might go, and I can create these in different programs. If you have Gmail, you have Google Documents, which can create simple presentations. And then there's LibreOffice, formerly OpenOffice. I don't know if you've heard of that, but that's a free program. So you don't need to pay Microsoft. It's free. Something very similar, pretty much the same kind of software, Lotus Symphony from IBM. This is what I use oftentimes. It has a very nice interface, looks very nice, it's easy to work with. So what I do is you can also install the programs. There are versions of the programs of like LibreOffice that you can install on a USB stick. And then I can stick it in the computer if I'm in a classroom that I don't usually use. I can run the program, my LibreOffice, OpenOffice, from a memory stick, from a USB stick, or if you know Dropbox. Anybody use Dropbox? Okay, that's a nice file backup software. You can run programs from your Dropbox folder too. So you go to portableapps.com. You can get, for example, versions of web browsers like Firefox, simple word processors like LibreOffice, PDF viewers, and you can install them on one of these and then run the program from this in any computer. And Google, anybody use Microsoft, Google Chrome or Firefox? Okay, those are good programs, far better than Internet Explorer. I can run them from here. Some other options. Some people like maybe graphics like mind maps or concept maps in your slides and such. Now, this is a free program that will do it, although the quality is not great, but there are free programs like FreeMind that can do concept maps, which you can't really create easily in PowerPoint. If you're good with graphics software, you could do it in your graphics program. SmartDraw is a nice program that can do really nice concept maps, flow charts, and other graphics. Although it's a bit expensive, but SmartDraw looks pretty nice. If you use Apple Macintosh operating system, if you have a Macintosh computer, there's Keynote, which probably does better graphics than PowerPoint. So Keynote and SmartDraw can save your files into PDF, PowerPoint, graphics formats, and they have better graphics than PowerPoint. Any of you in science or engineering know LaTeX? We have science and engineering people here? Okay, later, when you get into later on in your studies, you might learn of a kind of a classic program called LaTeX in the world of science, math, and engineering. And people in science, math, and engineering usually use LaTeX software to create documents for publication, for example, books. But it can also produce PDF, slide-style PDFs. So this is a snapshot of actually a PDF document, but it's in a slide format, slide size format. And the nice thing is you can put a navigation bar on the side, and I can click back and forth between different parts of my presentation. So it's a PDF with hyperlinks, and I can jump around like a navigation bar. And if you're doing formulas or equations, this might be a better option if you know how to do LaTeX already. Also, if you're doing formulas and equations, you need to put a formula or equation into your PowerPoint slide. There is a website, codecogs.com, where you can input using LaTeX syntax. You can put in the syntax for a formula or equation, and then it will produce that, that instantly in a PNG or JPEG or GIF file format, some kind of a picture format. So it creates a graphic version of the equation immediately. And you can simply copy and paste that or save that and then put that into your PowerPoint or into your handout and such. So if you work with equations and formulas, that's a really neat website. Now, you notice I'm not using PowerPoint. I'm using Prezi. Do you like this? It's very different from PowerPoint. It has more of an artsy feel. Okay, it's basically what I'm using here, my presentation software. It's like a big canvas. It works like a big art canvas, and kind of works like you can make it work like a mind map or a concept map. So PowerPoint might be good if what you're presenting is okay in a very logical, linear sequence. So PowerPoint is good if what you're presenting goes well in a very linear, step-by-step sequence. For some things, PowerPoint is maybe good for that. For other things, it might be easier to show maybe connections between things or to have a better kind of flow with something that's kind of non-traditional like Prezi. So this is an online program. You can sign up for an account with your Code account. You can get the academic version. And the online version is free. And it's nice. You can, so it's like a big canvas. You can kind of zoom around. And you don't want to fly around too much and make your audience members dizzy or like airsick. You know, you're creating an academic presentation on an IMAX movie. But it's really nice. It's easier to work with graphics. It's relatively new software, so there are some limitations. For example, it's a little harder to work with the text, but it's easy to work with the graphics. I can put in just about any kind of graphic file. It's very easy. And so basically I've got a big canvas. Another thing I like about this, it's easy for me to kind of lay out my things in a graphic organization that helps me to remember the flow and main points of my talk. So I remember I've got planning, organization, and I've got the slide design, I've got the rehearsal and the delivery like you saw in the first menu. It's easy for me to remember the flow of my talk because I've laid it out in my Prezi like that. So the online version is free, so it works through a web browser online, so you do need a good internet connection. There is a version that you can download, which you have to pay for. I think it's about $60 US. But the free version works totally online through a web browser. So it gives you this kind of your menu bar, your controls. You have kind of control wheel with your different options. And over there, I think maybe you should turn out some lights so you can see better. But there are these this is kind of a canvas you have to work with. You put your different objects in the canvas, and then you make path lines to indicate how you want to move around from one object to another. And you can easily change the path lines. I can take something out and keep it in my file, but it doesn't show up in the presentation. So it's really nice, especially for graphics. And of course, there's the traditional whiteboard. When I teach, I actually don't use PowerPoint, hardly at all. Sometimes I might use Prezi. If I'm teaching, I prefer a whiteboard, but although not like that. That's a little messy. Same thing as a bad PowerPoint slide with too much text. Especially if you're doing a math or science presentation, maybe you need a whiteboard because you need to write things on the board. And I also like whiteboard because I can write things on the board and I can still maintain eye contact with the students. PowerPoint tends to take away that interaction and the eye contact because everybody's focusing on the slides, and the teacher or the professor or the presenter is also facing the PowerPoint back to the audience. That's not good. You shouldn't turn your back to the audience, but even the presenter or the professor is focusing on the PowerPoint and reads aloud the slide and goes next, and reads it aloud and goes next. If you use a whiteboard, Again, try to maintain your eye contact with the audience. Kind of break your whiteboard up into columns, maybe. Write in large enough text that people can read it. And kind of go fill up one column, and then go down the next column. And kind of write neatly, and in nice, neat columns, not really crowded and small like that. I'm still a fan of whiteboards. Now, handouts are a good idea. You may notice, for example, you may want to present like Steve Jobs. You notice Steve Jobs does not use PowerPoint, because PowerPoint is from Microsoft, and Microsoft is the enemy. So he is not going to use PowerPoint. Steve Jobs uses minimal graphics, and in fact, he uses Keynote, probably. Keynote is what I think I showed you earlier. It's a graphics program, presentation program from Apple, and it has better graphics abilities. But he uses very simple graphics. No PowerPoint, just simple graphics on Keynote and such. So if you want to use PowerPoint minimally, or not at all, or if you want to use Prezi or Keynote, or just the whiteboard, especially in an EMC course, in an English course, you might want to provide a handout to your classmates and your professor with explanations, definitions, and such as a courtesy, so they can take notes on it and they can have some notes. Now, the nice thing is if you put information on a handout, you don't have to put as much on a PowerPoint. You don't have to put everything on a PowerPoint or a whiteboard. You have stuff on a handout. And so you can more easily go back and forth between you and the handout, or between the handout and the PowerPoint, or your Prezi, if you use them kind of conservatively. So use presentation software kind of conservatively, and sometimes it's a good idea to provide a handout. Especially if you're not providing a slide handout, handouts of your slides, some other kind of handout in a normal text document might be good. You don't kill two inches. Finally, the most important thing in a presentation is you. So you want people to focus on you, not your PowerPoint, not your presentation software, or not the handout that you're reading from all the time, like that. You want to interact with the audience. You want people to look at you, and you want to interact with them. And you want to talk to them, not talk to your PowerPoint. So you should be the focus of your presentation, maintaining eye contact with your fellow students, your professor, and such. So if you look at Steve Jobs and his presentation style, he is really good about maintaining eye contact with the audience. The focus is on Steve Jobs and his cool new product that he's showing you. The focus is not on his graphics in the back. He uses minimal graphics. Mainly to show important pictures, like pictures of his product and such. Another good example, do you know Michael Sandel? He's a Harvard philosophy professor. His lectures are shown at night on EBS. He does not use PowerPoint at all. No PowerPoint. He comes out onto the stage and he just hits everybody with a question, a moral dilemma question, and he gets students talking. Some students take one side of an issue, and some students take another side. He gets them to talk and exchange ideas, kind of debate. So it's mainly focused on him, except when he gives the floor to students who exchange ideas. And then he takes the floor, he takes control again, and he kind of summarizes what the students said and analyzes their assumptions behind their different positions. So he controls the attention. So your eyes are focused on Michael Sandel or Steve Jobs, and that's a good presenter who is able to interact with the audience. Okay, now rehearsal. So let's talk about multitasking. The reason, for example, why my German presentation failed horribly was I was focusing on two things at once: the German and then the content of my presentation, which was a linguistics class. You cannot multitask. You, for example, cannot drive while talking on a cell phone. Many studies have shown that if you're trying to drive while talking on a cell phone, you're just as likely to have an accident as a drunk driver. And Even if you wear a headset, it doesn't matter. You're still splitting your attention between the road or the car and somebody who is not physically there, and you have to give your full attention to the conversation to that person. So you cannot split your attention, you cannot multitask. And when it comes to a presentation, you cannot focus on the content of your presentation and on the English at the same time. When you're giving your actual presentation, you don't want to think about the English. You need to rehearse all of that beforehand. You want to focus on just the content of your talk, not being distracted by the English. Because if you're distracted by the English in your performance, you're worried about how good your English will be and what classmates will think of you about your English skills, that will distract you and you will get lost, or you will not do very well delivering the content, the main message of your talk. So you want to take care of this in rehearsal. You want to rehearse probably several times. I at least do mental rehearsal, mental rehearsal as well as actual rehearsal in your case. So it's good to rehearse maybe several times, focusing on purely non-content areas. For example, your English grammar, vocabulary, your pronunciation, the intonation, and the organization of flow. You probably want to practice those things maybe once, twice, several times separately, depending on your confidence and such. Maybe you want to rehearse once focusing on pronunciation, and another time to focus on intonation and posture and gestures, and maybe another time to work on the flow and organization. And then one or two times finally to practice the contents themselves, because that's the most important thing. So that when you actually do your presentation in class, you can just focus on the content. So in the class presentation, don't think about the English. Rehearse that several times beforehand. Also visualization strategies, especially if you do kind of mental rehearsal. Maybe I rehearse in my mind how my talk is going to go, what I'm going to say, and what I'm going to talk about. I try to visualize what it's going to be like. I want to caution you, this is not some kind of magical strategy, like just visualizing it is magically going to make your presentation great, the way some motivational speakers might tell you. This is strategic visualization, where you think specifically about your talk and what kind of things you want to do, what kind of things you want to do well in your talk. So I'm going to imagine myself speaking with good intonation. I'm going to imagine myself speaking with good pronunciation. I'm going to imagine myself interacting with the audience and asking questions. I'm going to imagine myself using good gestures and body language and such. You're going to visualize, in the sense you're going to think about what things you're going to do well and how you're going to do them well, how you're going to practice for them and such. So that kind of visualization can actually help you during the rehearsal process, when you imagine yourself doing those things and what you need to do in order to do those things, what you need to do to accomplish them. I also like to use what we call memory aids, or mnemonics, memory tricks. So maybe some of you have learned memory tricks when you have to memorize a lot of information for your exams. There's some really old classic memory tricks for presentations. Now in my case, I put everything out, I mapped it out on a Prezi canvas, and I have a good visual memory, so I can just remember my main contents, the main outline I showed you at first, where I've got the planning, organization, the slide design, the rehearsal, the delivery. I can remember that. And so during my talk, I'm not likely to get lost or lose focus. You can also use classic memorization tricks. These are really old tricks that professional speakers have used. Let's say you're giving a presentation, you want to memorize your outline, the outline of your talk, so that you won't get lost. So these are the 4 points of my talk. Let's say I've got rehearsal, so maybe in my mind I'll make some kind of a creative dynamic image, something really strange or crazy. And so I've got, well, the first part is planning and organization. So in that part of the room, I'll imagine, create some kind of a weird image, something that's easy to remember, that helps me to remember planning or organization. Maybe I imagine a team of people planning something. Then next I've got slide design, so I create some kind of a funny or strange image that helps me to remember slide design in this part of the room. And I can remember my subpoints because then I can, kind of put my subpoints out coming from that way too. I could create memory associations for my different subpoints. In that part of the room I've got rehearsal. I can kind of imagine maybe an opera singer rehearsing or a singer rehearsing something strange or weird, and that helps me remember that part of the talk. And over here I've got delivery. Maybe I can imagine something really strange like a delivery truck driving up and such. And from that I can also extend it, I put the subpoints under that over in those spaces. You can also imagine the different parts of your house, and the doorway, the main doorway is your introduction, and you can create mental associations between different parts of your house, your apartment, and different parts of your talk. So these are really old locus or location mnemonics that go back to ancient Roman and Greek speakers that I sometimes use and find effective. And when you rehearse pronunciation, things you want to rehearse: stress and intonation, 2 vowels and 3 consonants, stress patterns, and intonation. Okay, English has a very complicated stress system. We've got word stress, compound word stress, like White House. Compound stress. Notice the first part has more stress than the second part. Compound stress, White House, greenhouse. And then sentence stress. There's kind of a stress on the main word or the main point of a sentence or clause. If you listen to native English speakers, you'll notice each clause or sentence or phrase has kind of one word, the most important word, that has more stress than the other words in that clause. So you want to practice at least once on your stress patterns and your intonation. So stress syllables are longer, they're louder, it's louder, out. Okay, the first syllable of louder, louder. Okay. So they're longer, louder, and there's a pitch change. My pitch goes up and down, and these are things you'd want to rehearse. And also the intonation in general, sentence intonation. There's more intonation in English, more complex because it goes along with the stress patterns. So you want to rehearse this in your talk. Vowels, so there are long vowels, and unfortunately your dictionaries use symbols that might confuse you. The vowel as in they, it's not eh, but a. It's a glide, a, or great or fade. And the O as in boat, it's not O, it's O. Like I bought a boat. This is O. It's not O, but O. Like I bought a boat. O. And the I as in bit or nutrition, it's very short compared to, say, beat or bite. It's short because your tongue is relaxed. And so it's actually a completely different vowel, beat versus bit. The bit is shorter, your tongue muscle is relaxed. And then the what we call the schwa, is really short, a bait. So the bait is very short, you can barely hear it. Consonants, very quickly. In Korean, jiet, sangjit, chiet, and also shi, they're very different than the English cha, sha, ja. In Korean, your tongue's flat, like this, when you do shi. So your tongue is flat, and either coming close to the top of the mouth or touching it, like in the case of jiet, your tongue is flat. For English, sha, cha, your tongue is curled up like this, and it's the tongue tip that's touching a little bit further back in the mouth. So it's tongue tip like this, like cha, ja. And if a word ends in cha, ja, sha, there's no extra consonant, like English. Not English-y, that's Konglish-y, it's English. The English judge. The Z is like an S. The Z is not like a jiet. The Z is just like an S. Start with an S and then vibrate your throat. The tongue does not contact the mouth. It's just like an S, but with vibration down here in your throat. Very easy. Okay. Delivery, audience interaction, and voice quality and nervousness. Okay. So if you look at these guys, Steve Jobs, Michael Sandel, they have really good voice quality, they have good energy, enthusiasm, they're enthusiastic about what they are talking about, and they're good at handling nervousness. So let's think about enthusiasm and energy. It's first of all important to marshal your energy and enthusiasm to make the audience members interested, and also helps them to follow your talk, and especially to produce the intonation of English. The intonation as well as the energy. This will make the experience more pleasant for your listeners if you put in energy and enthusiasm and intonation. So, unfortunately, college students do some things that are not good for energy or your speaking ability. Sugar. If you take sugar, carbohydrates, you get a temporary energy increase, and then after about 10 or 20 minutes it goes down. Your body actually has to take the sugar or carbohydrates out of your blood and store it away. So your energy goes down. So it's best to avoid sugar sources, carbohydrates. It's better to avoid coffee right before a talk. Now I like to drink a liter of coffee every morning. I used to drink more in grad school. But before a talk, no, because caffeine, especially coffee, will dry your throat and make your throat dry. If you need to drink before or during a presentation, water is the best. Juices may not be good. Many juices have added sugar. So unless it's a juice that's totally natural, or best thing is water. And of course, proper sleep. Exercise is really good for energy levels. Proper diet. In English, diet really mainly means your eating habits. Proper eating habits. Not losing weight, but your eating habits. Voice quality. One thing that really helps if you're not used to giving a presentation is to kind of use these muscles down here, especially if you don't have a strong voice. Use your stomach muscles, diaphragm muscles, and suck them in, tense them up, and project your voice from down here. Don't try to use the throat muscles because you may strain your throat muscles. Use your muscles from down here, so I kind of tense them, pull them in when I'm talking, especially to give the volume that I need. Also, I tend to have voice problems because I had a lot of illnesses during the winter. So if you have a bad voice, one really great thing is this Korean medicine called Yongaksan. It really helps me with my voice problems. Better than cough drops. Or at least Moksarang candy, not Mok candy, but Moksarang candy, which has Yongaksan in it. It's really good for bad voice. Also avoid pause fillers or heavy breathing. And that's where good rehearsal is helpful. Posture and poise, if you watch, of course, Steve Jobs, Michael Sandel, they have good posture, poise. They use their gestures somewhat. And you don't have to use as many gestures as we Westerners do. You don't have to move around as much as we do, but you watch them for how they move around and how they stand up, and their posture, their poise, how they carry themselves. It's important to face the audience, to interact with the audience, maintain some sort of eye contact with them, and look at them and make sure that they are paying attention to you. And if they start to fall asleep, maybe you need to increase your intonation or your energy levels, and make sure you check your intonation. Also ask them questions sometimes to kind of maintain their interest. And again, don't read aloud from your slides. Again, discourse markers, and there's a handout on our website with a list of sample discourse markers that you can use to express transitions between one idea and another, between one section of your talk and another. Finally, nervousness is a problem. Many people misunderstand nervousness. They think, oh, I'm nervous, that means I'm not going to do well, or I'm not really prepared, or I'm not really good at this. They think it means something about their competence, their ability. And that's the wrong way to understand nervousness. Nervousness is simply a natural, biological, and psychological response to an important task or a stressful situation. It is simply your mind's way of building up energy and attentional resources that you need to focus on your task. So instead of getting discouraged by your nervousness, you should actually draw from your nervousness. It is a source of energy to help you to focus and concentrate on your task of preparing, for the lecture or the presentation and the task of delivering it. So when you're delivering your presentation and you feel nervous, that's normal. When you look at Steve Jobs, he doesn't look nervous, but I'm sure he is, because he's speaking to a crowd of thousands and everything has to work right because the media is watching, everyone is watching. I'm sure he's nervous, but he probably draws from that nervous energy to help focus his thoughts and to give him the energy. So you use your nervous energy to give you the energy that you need in order to have the energy to project your voice, the enthusiasm, the attention, the ability to concentrate on your contents. So you use your nervous energy as a strength. Make use of it. Don't be afraid of it, because it's natural. And that's the way you can actually manage it and control it. If you have time, you can go to YouTube and you can look at samples from Steve Jobs and Michael Sandel. There's also a website, TED.com, which has good examples of public speeches, speeches from people in government, education, business, and such variety of presentation styles. The nice thing about Prezi is I can put in a YouTube video pretty easily and it's been loading in the background and it's ready to go.